Welcome to Simply Drawing. I'm Jackie Gratford and I've been drawing ever since I can remember. It's one of my greatest joys. Everyone can draw and it's a wonderful experience. Learning to draw teaches you about the world around you and develops an amazing number of different skills. It's something that lasts forever and is an expression of who you are. I often hear people say, I can't draw. And this is usually because they don't draw regularly or haven't drawn since they were kids at school. Today, I'm going to simplify the whole process for you and make it easy. So get ready to explore everything you need to begin in the amazing world of drawing. I'm going to start by discussing the basic materials you're going to need. One of the great things about drawing is that very little is required. The materials I'm going to talk about are the basics. You can expand and explore other materials once you feel you've mastered the beginnings of drawing. There are many types of easels. If you visit your local art shop, you'll see how many different varieties there are. I would only stress that you make sure your easel is stable. There's nothing more frustrating than drawing on a wobbly surface. This easel here is nothing fancy, but it's sturdy and does the trick. Some people prefer to draw standing up so they can move as they draw and stand back from their work to view it. That's my personal preference. Others prefer to sit, in which case a drafting table would be better. If you don't have these things, don't let that stop you from drawing. You can easily draw sitting at the kitchen table or under a tree on a lovely spring day. There's no right or wrong, only what works for you. You'll need a board that's bigger than the paper you're working on. It's good if it has extra space so that you can pin up roughs or reference if you need to, and you can stick the paper on with either masking tape or a bulldog clip. The advantage of masking tape is that you can move the paper around if you want. Pencils come in a variety of tones. This chart is a scale from dark soft leads to light hard leads. H stands for hard, B for black, and F for fine point. The 6B is really dark and then they get lighter up the scale, so the 6H here, as you can see, is much lighter. To start with, you wouldn't need the whole scale and I would only use the 2H, HB, 2B, 3B and 6B. Later on, you'll expand the types of pencils you use to include a full range of leads when necessary, and also other mediums like graphite, charcoal, Conte, pastels and many more. There's a whole heap of fun ahead experimenting with art materials once you've mastered the basics. Vinyl erasers are great for removing most of the marks on your paper. Kneadable erasers are also great, especially for lifting out highlights and pulling back some of the dark bits if you need to. You can mould them into any shape, giving you a fair degree of accuracy for tricky fine bits. Stanley knives are a really effective way to sharpen your pencil. You have greater control than with a normal sharpener because you can vary the amount of lead that shows. You can see here that I've left quite a bit of lead on this pencil. This helps if you want really wide strokes and want to block in shading quickly. Scalpels can also be used, but I feel that Stanley knives are a little safer as you can wind them back down, especially if you have small children in the house. A sandpaper pad or a single sheet of sandpaper attached to your board is great for sharpening the end of your pencil. It can also be used to make your pencil blunter depending on the particular result that you're after. Paper stumps are pieces of paper rolled into a solid stump and then sharpened at an end. They're terrific for blending your work or softening the pencil line. Choosing what paper you want will affect the mood of your entire work. Cartridge paper is a great paper to start on. It's inexpensive, comes in various sizes and has a good medium smooth surface. We'll mostly be using A3 with our drawings here. And once you're comfortable with the basic skills, you'll have a great time experimenting with other papers that have different textures and colours. It's handy to have a scrap piece of paper attached to your board to clean your eraser before you use it. Otherwise, it can leave marks on your paper. The paper can also be used to fine-tune the point of your pencil, test if it's the right bluntness or sharpness for the marks you're about to make. Another spare piece of paper is useful for leaning on so you don't smudge your work. Sketchbooks or visual diaries are ideal for location drawing. Most of your development will come from drawing what you see. You can take the book with you anywhere, trips to the beach, holidays, or even just a cafe while you have a cup of coffee. Lots of preliminary work can be done in your visual diary, and it's a great way to develop your visual skills. You can buy a ready-made framing device or make one yourself. It's simply 2 pieces of cardboard in L shapes. By joining the L's, you make an adjustable rectangle to look through and see where the best composition is. Varying your hand position can create lots of different effects in your drawing. There are 2 main ways to hold your pencil, and the first is the handwriting position. This, of course, is the most well-known way to hold your pencil. We're all taught it at school, and it can be used for precision lines and the really fiddly bits. The second most used hand position is the underhand position, where the pencil passes under the hand instead of over the thumb. It's great for looser lines and helps free up your work. This is a good position for quickly sketching in large drawings. There are many other ways to hold your pencil. The cupped hand position is similar to the underhand position, but the whole hand turns around so that the palm faces upwards. The pencil on the side position is the opposite and has the top of the hand facing up and the pencil held loosely in the fingers and not touching the hand at all. There's also the fencing foil position, which has the fingers curled around the pencil like a sword. Focus on the main 2 hand positions in the beginning. The important thing is to make sure you're relaxed when you hold the pencil and that it feels comfortable and natural. Now that you've experimented with different hand positions, you can use that knowledge to develop variations in line, texture and tone. Practice drawing straight lines freehand in the underhand position and then circular strokes followed by scribbles and flicked lines. Here I'm drawing thick lines and thin lines with a soft 6B and then a hard 6H. As you can see, it creates quite different results. When your pencil is sharp, it produces a different effect to a blunt pencil. These lines are both produced using a 2B. The only difference is how sharp they are. I can also try this with different hand positions to see how natural it feels and whether it achieves other effects. Try using the different leads laid flat to create a smooth result. Now try using the different leads with the tip of the pencil. It's like filling up the pantry with different ingredients that you can pull out later when you need them. Hatching and cross-hatching are really useful for creating tone. Hatching is simply closely packed straight lines in diagonal direction, as you can see I'm doing here. Cross-hatching is when the lines are laid over the top and in the opposite direction, and then vertically and horizontally as well. This can create a really smooth effect, and if you keep going, you can get an almost flawless polished result. Using cross-hatching, it's good to try and create a scale of tone with an HB pencil, like the following example I'm starting here. You can follow this up with a scale that has no separations. Here it is finished, and you can easily see how many different variations in depth you can get from simple grey lead pencils. Creating the illusion of 3 dimensions is a relatively straightforward process. You can turn 4 basic shapes, the square, rectangle, triangle and circle, into 3-dimensional objects with the simple use of line, and this is a good building block for all later work. Starting with the square, add short lines of equal length to 3 of the corners. Make sure that they're parallel to each other and at about 45 degrees. Join those lines up and you have a cube. The lines are a little rough as I'm drawing freehand here and not measuring up or using a ruler. Another version of the cube is from a diamond with a longer horizontal line than a vertical. Add 3 even parallel lines dropping down and then join them up. You now have another cube, but this time the edge where the sides meet is pointing towards you. You can create a cylinder from a rectangle by adding an ellipse to the bottom and the top of it. An ellipse is an oval shape and each quarter is exactly the same size. The best way to draw one accurately is really only through practice and using your eye to see if it looks right. If I draw a triangle now and add an ellipse to the bottom of it, I have a cone. I've left the circle to the last as it's a little different to the others. To turn this into a sphere, you don't need to add any lines, just some shading. Start by drawing a circle and lightly shade it, leaving a light spot in the upper left corner. Make sure the shading is gradual and that the light spot is noticeably lighter. To add to the effect, fade a soft shadow away from the light side under the circle. Now have a go at shading the other shapes as well. You can see some that I've done here. The shapes that we made 3D with the lines take on another dimension once you add the shading. And also note how the shadow sits the shapes firmly in the space on the page rather than floating in the air. Basic shapes can be seen in objects all around us. Sometimes they are simple and easy to recognise, like the cube in a cardboard box. And sometimes they're more complex with objects made up of many shapes and take a practised eye to see. We're going to start with simple objects where one basic shape is easy to see. And for this, I'm going to draw a metronome and my knowledge of drawing 3D cones to help me do that. I start by drawing a cone with an HB pencil. I'm only sketching it in lightly so I can make changes without leaving permanent marks on the paper. Next, I add the shape of the metronome within the cone and the details that define its character. The last step is to make it look as if it's real by adding small amounts of tone. I'm blocking in the main bit of shading with a 3B. And then I smooth it out with a 2H over the top or a paper stump to get a more polished look. Every now and then I need to pull bits back to make the transition from light to dark as smooth as possible. I finish off by adding tone on the detailed parts of the metronome as well. It's exactly the same principle as when I was shading the larger parts. I do need to have my pencil a bit sharper though to get into all the tiny little bits. Have a look around the house and see what you can find that fits a basic shape. It could be a clock, a camera, a long glass, a log of wood, a basketball. Have a go at drawing these following the same steps. Cameras have a good square shape which makes them a pretty easy thing to start with. Perspective is a fabulous tool to aid our 3D effect. Have you ever noticed how a road or a railway track gets smaller as it goes into the distance and seems to vanish? Well, that's an example of perspective. There are basically 3 types of perspective that I'll now take you through. The first is one-point perspective. To start, I'm going to draw a horizon line. In real life, it's the line that is either the actual horizon or whatever horizontal line is level with your eye. If I draw a square now and draw lines going back from each corner, the lines will meet at what's called the vanishing point on the horizon line. In reality, we know that these lines are parallel, but to look real when they're drawn, they must meet at the vanishing point. You can see how all the lines from this square go back to meet at the one point, hence the name one-point perspective. It's also the same type of perspective we see with the railway going back in the distance, as you can see in this drawing. The vanishing point is here on the horizon line and everything is going back towards it. Next is two-point perspective. When an object isn't at full frontal view, you will see two sides or planes and the corner edge will be facing you. This will then have two vanishing points, one to the left and one to the right. Once again, this can then also apply to everyday life. The vanishing points are here on the horizon line and everything else is going back towards them. If an object is viewed from an extreme angle, the vertical lines will have their own vanishing points as well. This is three-point perspective. The two vanishing points we had in two-point perspective are the same, but it's this vertical vanishing point that adds the extra dimension. This is used when you're viewing something from a very low or high point. It creates what I call a Batman angle. Foreshortening goes hand in hand with perspective in that the things closer to you look bigger than they do in the distance. This means that we sometimes draw something that is tiny much bigger than larger things that are further away. Our brain makes the connection, however, and knows that the tiny thing is still little despite being drawn larger. It just looks larger because it's closer to us. If I move this ring, you can see how it changes shape. As I move it towards us, it loses its circular properties and becomes more elliptical. You can see the same thing in this drawing. When the ring is flat towards us, there's no sign of its circular shape whatsoever. The same principle applies if you look at my hands. As my hand is pointing towards you, my fingers get shorter until they're almost like stumps. Once again, you can see the same thing in this drawing. When the hand is facing us, the fingers and palm have become really, really short. Measuring what you draw with your eye is an essential tool. There are a few ways that you can aid this process. Using a measuring grid can help give you a point of reference. You can buy ready-made measuring devices or make them up out of an old picture frame like I've done here. This frame has the same proportions as my paper and I've simply drawn a grid onto the glass. This can then be used as an aid for measuring my drawing. I've lightly divided my page into the same number of squares, but I've made sure the lines are light enough to be rubbed out later. Then, as I'm drawing in my picture, I match up what I draw with what I see in the corresponding squares. The top of the bottle starts in the third square from the right, in the row second from the top, so that's where I start to sketch it. Another good way to practice a similar principle is to draw a grid over a photocopy of a picture. Draw up a matching grid on a plain piece of paper and try to copy it. You can see here that I've drawn squares on this photocopy, which I'm now going to replicate. Another way to measure is sight size drawing. Hold your pencil, ruler, or anything that's straight out in front of you with your arm fully extended. Close one eye and measure the first bit of the subject you're going to draw. Hold the pencil against your paper and using a different pencil, mark that measurement on your paper. Continue this process until you have most of the main points of the drawing measured. If you want the drawing to be either bigger or smaller, simply move closer or further away from the subject. As you do more and more drawing, your eye will automatically check where the objects are in relation to each other and start to use cross-reference measuring as a natural process. Looking at the hat and the bottle, for example, you would always check where the top of the hat is in relation to the bottle. Compare the width of the bottle to the hat Double check how each bit measures compared to the objects around it. Most importantly, draw what you see, not what you think you see. The measurements may not be what you expect at first, but trust them. They will make more sense once everything's together. Lighting is one of the most important tools you'll have as far as creating mood with your art. If you look at the drawings of this cylinder I did, you'll see the different effects of lighting from the side and from the back and from the front. You can also see the effect that the direction of the different lighting has on the shadows. The shadows tend to fall in the opposite direction to the source of light. There are two main types of lighting, natural light and artificial light. The effect of natural light will depend largely on the time of day and the weather, so when you choose to draw will be really important. During the morning or the late afternoon, the sun is lower and creates a gentle side light and longer shadows, bringing out the texture in objects. It's also a slightly more orange light, although we're drawing in black and white, so that won't affect us too much at this stage. You can see the side shadows on this face I've drawn. When the sun's at its highest, everything is lit directly overhead and it creates a harsher light, particularly on sunny days. If you're drawing people, you can get quite strong shadows under the eyes and nose, which isn't necessarily all that attractive, but can be quite moody if you're after an effect. On slightly overcast days, the light will be softened and the look will be quite natural and flattering, but without as much contrast. With studio light, you have much more control. Try and use a light source or a lamp that allows you to manipulate the direction of the light source. You can use a simple desk light or a freestanding lamp, and keep in mind that a stronger wattage light bulb will give you a more dramatic effect. Studio lights used for photography are fantastic and will give a terrific effect. Notice the difference in my face when I am lit from the side and then when I'm lit from underneath. This one has a dark and eerie effect, good for telling spooky ghost stories.